At 11 o'clock, the ashram gong sounds for lunch. All stand up until Sri Bhagavan has left the hall. If it is an ordinary day, the devotees disperse to their homes. But perhaps it is some festival or bhiksha given by one of the devotees as an offering or thanksgiving, and all are invited to lunch. The large dining hall is completely bare of furniture. Pieces of banana leaf are spread out as plates in double rows, breadthwise across the red tiled floor, and the devotees sit cross-legged before them. A partition in the middle stretches 3/4 of the width of the hall. At one side of it sit those Brahmins who prefer to retain their orthodoxy. At the other side, non-Brahmins, non-Hindus, and those Brahmins who prefer to eat with other devotees. Provision is thus made for the orthodox, but Sri Bhagavan says nothing to induce Brahmins either to retain or discard their orthodoxy, as at any rate not publicly or to all alike. He himself sits against the east wall in sight of both sections of the devotees. Attendants and Brahmin women walk down the rows serving rice, vegetables, condiments on the leaves. All wait for Sri Bhagavan to start eating, and he waits until everyone has been served. Eating is a full-time occupation, not mixed with chatter, as in the West. An American lady who finds it hard to conform to Indian customs has brought a spoon with her. One of the servers piles some vegetables on her leaf and tells her that they have been specially prepared without the hot spices used in the general cooking, as Sri Bhagavan himself gave instructions for it. The rest all eat busily with their hands. Attendants pass up and down the rows, serving second helpings, water and buttermilk, fruit or sweet. Then Sri Bhagavan calls an attendant back to him, seemingly angrily. When there is remissness in the outer technique of life, he can show anger. The attendant is putting a 1/4 mango on every leaf and has slipped a 1/2 mango onto his. He puts it back and picks out the smallest piece he can see. One by one, the diners finish, and as each one finishes, he rises and leaves, stopping to wash his hands at the tap outside before he goes home. Until 2 o'clock, Sri Bhagavan rests, and the hall is closed to devotees. The ashram management decided that his failing health made this midday rest necessary, but how were they to bring it about? If asked to accept an indulgence that would inconvenience the devotees, Bhagavan would most probably refuse. So rather than risk this, they decided to make the change unofficially by privately requesting devotees not to enter the hall at that time. For a few days all went well, and then a newcomer, not knowing the rule, went in after lunch. An attendant beckoned him to come out, but Sri Bhagavan called him back to ask what it was all about. After lunch the next day, Sri Bhagavan was seen sitting on the steps outside the hall, and when the attendant asked him what was the matter, he said, "It seems that no one is allowed into the hall until 2 o'clock. It was only with great difficulty that he was prevailed upon to accept the hours of rest. In the afternoon there may be new faces in the hall, for few of the devotees sit the whole day there. Even those who live near the ashram usually have household or other tasks to see to, and many have their fixed hours of attendance. Sri Bhagavan never speaks about doctrine except in answer to a question, or only very rarely. And when he is answering questions, it is not in a tone of pontifical gravity, but in a conversational manner, often with wit and laughter. Nor is the questioner expected to accept anything because he says it. He is free to dispute until convinced. A theosophist asks whether Sri Bhagavan approves of the search for invisible masters, and he retorts with a swift wit, "If they are invisible, how can you see them?" "Well, in consciousness," the Theosophist replies, and then comes the real answer. "In consciousness, there are no others." Someone from another ashram asks, "Am I right in saying that the difference is that you don't ascribe reality to the world, and we do?" And Sri Bhagavan uses humor to avert discussion. "On the contrary, since we say that being is one, we ascribe full reality to the world, and what is more, we ascribe full reality to God. But by saying there are three, you only give 1/3 reality to the world, and you only give 1/3 reality to God." Everyone joins in the laughter, but in spite of this, some of the devotees drift into a discussion with the visitor, and then Sri Bhagavan remarks, "There is not much benefit in such discussions." If questions are put in English, Bhagavan replies through an interpreter. Though he does not speak English fluently, he understands everything and pulls up the interpreter if there is the slightest inaccuracy. Although doctrinally uniform, the replies of Sri Bhagavan were very much ad hominem, varying considerably with the questioner. A Christian missionary asked, "Is God personal?" And without compromising with the doctrine of Advaita, Sri Bhagavan tried to make the answer easy for him, saying, "Yes, he is always the first person, the I, ever standing before you. If you give precedence to worldly things, God seems to have receded into the background. If you give up all else and seek Him alone, God alone will remain as the I, the Self." One wonders whether the missionary recalled that this is the name God proclaimed through Moses. Sri Bhagavan sometimes remarked on the excellence of "I am" as a divine name. It is usually newcomers who ask questions and receive explanations. The disciples seldom have questions to ask, some of them never. The explanations are not the teaching. They are only a signpost to the teaching. 5:15, Sri Bhagavan rubs his stiff knees and legs and reaches out for the staff. Sometimes it requires 2 or 3 efforts to rise from the couch, but he will not accept help. During the 20 minutes of his absence, the hall is again swept out and covers arranged on the couch. Some 10 or 15 minutes after his return, the chanting of the Vedas begins, followed by the Upadesa, the instruction in 30 verses of Sri Bhagavan. This is one point in which Sri Bhagavan has discarded orthodoxy. For strictly speaking, only Brahmins are allowed to listen to the chanting of the Vedas, whereas here all do alike. When asked what the benefit of it is, he has replied simply, "The sound of the chanting helps to still the mind." Bhagavan has also said explicitly that it is not necessary to learn the meaning. This is a practical illustration of what has been said about the meditation he enjoined. That is, not thought, but turning the mind inwards to the awareness beyond thought. The chanting lasts about 35 minutes. While it is going on, it often happens that he sits still, his face eternal, motionless, majestic, as though carved in rock. When the Vedas is finished, all sit very quietly until 6:30, when the ladies are expected to leave the ashram. Some of the men remain for another hour, usually in silence, sometimes talking or singing Tamil songs, and then there is supper, and the devotees disperse. The evening session is particularly precious because it combines the solemnity of the early morning chanting with the friendliness of the later hours. And yet, for those who apprehend it, the solemnity is always there, even when Sri Bhagavan is outwardly laughing and joking. An attendant comes to massage his legs with some liniment, but he takes it away from him. They fuss over him too much, but he turns the refusal into a joke, saying, "You have had grace by look and by speech, and now you want grace by touch. Let me have some of the grace by touch myself." However, it is only a pale reflection of his humor that can be set down on paper, for it was less the things said, keen and witty though they were, than the saying of them. When Bhagavan told the story, he was a complete actor, reproducing the part as though he lived it. It was fascinating to watch him, even for those who did not understand the language. Real life also was a part he played, and in real life the transitions could be just as swift, from humor to deep sympathy. Even in the early days, when he was thought to be oblivious to everything, he had a keen sense of humor, and there were jokes that he only told years later. On one occasion, when his mother and a crowd of others visited him at Pavasakunru, they bolted the door on the outside when they went to town for food, fearing that he might slip away. He, however, knew that the door could be lifted off its hinges and opened while still bolted. So in order to avoid the crowd and the disturbance, he slipped out that way while they were gone. On their return, they found the door shut and bolted, but the room empty. Later, when no one was about, he returned the same way. They sat telling one another in front of him how he had disappeared through a closed door and then appeared again by means of siddhis, supernatural powers, and no tremor showed on his face, though years later the whole hall was shaking with laughter when he told them the story. A word should be said about the great annual festivals. Most of the devotees were unable to live permanently at Tiruvannamalai and could only come occasionally, so that there were always crowds for the public holidays, especially for the great festivals, the four main ones, the Kartikai, the Deepavali, the Mahapuja, which is the anniversary of the mother's death, and the Jayanti, the birthday of Sri Bhagavan. Jayanti was the greatest and most heavily attended of these. At first, Sri Bhagavan was reluctant to have it celebrated at all. He composed the stanzas, "You who wish to celebrate the birthday, seek first whence was your birth. One's true birthday is when he enters that which transcends birth and death, the eternal being. At least on one's birthday, one should mourn one's entry into the world of samsara. To glory in it and celebrate it is like delighting in and decorating a corpse. To seek one's self and merge in the self, that is wisdom." However, for the devotees, the birth of Sri Bhagavan was cause for rejoicing, and he was induced to submit. But he refused either then or on any occasion to allow puja, or ritualistic worship, to be made to him. The crowd was vast, and all the devotees took their meals with Sri Bhagavan that day. Even the large dining hall was inadequate. A palm leaf roofing was erected on bamboo supports over the square of ground outside, and all sat there. There was also feeding of the poor, sometimes 2 or 3 relays coming to be fed, with police and Boy Scouts guarding the entrances and managing the crowds. On any such day, Sri Bhagavan would sit aloof, regal, and yet with an intimate look of recognition for each old devotee who came. At one of the Kartika festivals, when the crowds packed the whole ashram ground and a railing had to be erected round him to keep them off, a little boy scrambled through the bars and ran up to him and showed him his new toy. He turned to the attendant, laughing. "See how much use your railing is?" In September 1946, a great celebration was held for the 50th anniversary of Sri Bhagavan's arrival at Tiruvannamalai. Devotees gathered from far and wide. A golden jubilee souvenir was compiled of articles and poems written for the occasion. During the last years, the old hall was becoming too small even on ordinary days, and it became more usual to sit outside under a palm leaf roofing. In 1939, work had started on a temple over the mother's tomb, and this was completed in 1949, together with a new hall for Sri Bhagavan and the devotees to sit in. They were two parts of one building, constructed by traditional temple builders according to the sastric or scriptural rules. The building stretches south of the old hall and the office, between them and the road. The western half of it, south of the old hall, is the temple. The eastern half is a large, square, well-ventilated hall, where Sri Bhagavan was to sit with the devotees. The Kumbha Bhikshukam, or ritualistic opening of the temple and the hall, was an imposing ceremony that many of the devotees attended. It crowned years of effort, work, and planning. Sri Bhagavan, however, was reluctant to enter the new hall. He preferred simplicity and did not like any grandeur on his account. Many of the devotees also were reluctant. The old hall was so vibrant with his presence, and the new seemed cold and lifeless in comparison. When he entered it, the last sickness had already gripped his body.